the first objective of this session is to look at the language techniques that are used in persuasive writing. And hopefully by the end of this section, you guys are going to be able to identify persuasive writing techniques. So you'll be able to look at a bit of text and say, that's a writing technique. The second part of the session, you're going to do, or we're going to focus on looking at informative and descriptive language techniques. So again, same thing, by the end of that, you should be able to look at a passage of text and pick out some informative or descriptive language techniques. We are going to focus on those two. There are a lot of language techniques, and if you did the purpose of text session, you'll kind of remember that there's a lot of purpose of text as well. So this is really just an introduction. It's not going to be everything you need to know. So hopefully this will give you a springboard to then go forward and do a bit more of your own revision and your own practice on the back of this. Okay, so that's the objectives. This, first of all, then, is a quick recap of what we talked about when I did the purpose of text session on Tuesday. So when you do your functional skills English, to be honest with you, a lot of the English reading exam is or can be done using kind of common sense, using logic. A lot of it is reading comprehension, so understanding what the text is saying, looking for details under the surface, picking out kind of bits of information. So a lot of that might come quite naturally to you. However, there are elements in your English that you do need to know what the terminology is. So that if you get a question that says what language techniques are being used in the text, obviously you need to know what this means and you need to have memorized some language techniques. In the same way, if they say what is the purpose of this text, if you don't know what that means, obviously you won't be able to answer the question. So what we did on Tuesday was just kind of clarify what these terms mean. So purpose of text is basically the reason why the author has written a text. So every text is written for a reason. People don't just randomly write things and see what happens. So if someone wants to sell some trainers, they know what the purpose is. They know that their advert needs to make you buy the trainers. So that would be thought of as a persuasive text. And the way that they make that advert effective is by using a range of persuasive language techniques. So language techniques are the techniques that are used by the author in order to successfully achieve this purpose of text. So they're the two kind of main terms that you need to sort of be very clear on. And in this session, obviously, we're going to focus on the language techniques. And if you want to do more purpose of text, obviously you can watch the video we did Tuesday. Okay, great. So before I kind of jump into the session properly, has anyone got any questions? Is everyone feeling kind of happy with that at this point? I'll take silence as you not having any questions. No, everyone fairly happy. Good. All right. So let's get going then with the main part of the session. So what we're going to focus on first is persuasive writing and the language techniques that you might find in a piece of persuasive writing. So remember, persuasive writing is all about getting you, the reader, to do something, whether it's buying a pair of trainers, agreeing with someone's opinion, or anything like that. So what I've got here is a bunch of language techniques. We're going to try and reveal these as quickly as possible. And then following this, I'm going to give you kind of a little practice exercise to see kind of what you can remember. So first of all, we've got the technique, and a really common technique or a really common language technique in persuasive writing is what we call rhetorical questions. I've got a few learns on here that I recognize, so I'm sure at least one of you might be able to tell me what a rhetorical question is. You can see Victoria's typing. And Cheryl's typing as well. Good. Great. Let's just give Cheryl a couple of seconds to get her answer out. Yeah, exactly. So both of you are right there. Exactly. That's all right, Victoria. No, that's all good. I get that. Yeah, exactly. So a rhetorical question is a question to which the reader already knows the answer. That's the key thing. So you're going to read that question in a text and immediately your brain is going to kind of light up because you automatically know the answer. And like Cheryl says, you don't need to give the answer because the writer already knows you know it. It's one of these sort of unsaid things. So that's what a rhetorical question is. So when you do your English exam, they might say to you, identify a language technique in the text. You're going to see a rhetorical question and you're going to write rhetorical question. But what they'll also do is they'll ask you to give an example of that. So you'll have to pick out the sentence in the text, which is the rhetorical question. So I've just made up an example here. So imagine you're looking through a holiday brochure. You want to buy a holiday somewhere. You don't know where to go. On top of the brochure, it might say something like, have you ever felt like you need a holiday? And of course, anybody that reads that, immediately their brain is going to say yes. So that's an example of a rhetorical question. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the question paper might ask you what effect that language technique has. So why has the writer used a rhetorical question? When you give your answer to a question like that, there is no kind of one single right or wrong answer, as long as you write something logical. But what I've got here is obviously an example that you can use if you need to. And what I've put is that it makes the reader actively engage with the text. So if you write anything like that, when they ask you for the effect, then you'll get a mark. So these are the things you need to know. You need to know the writing technique. You need to know kind of what it is. You need to be able to kind of identify examples, and sometimes you need to say what the effect is. So we'll do these a lot quicker. So the next one is emotive language. Anyone got any idea what that means? Or what emotive language might be? The clue is this word here, emotive. Exactly, yes, perfect. So emotive language is the use of emotional language. It invokes an emotional response. Exactly. So I've put an example just there and I've underlined the emotional words. And the effect of emotive language, it makes an emotional connection with the reader. In fact, I prefer the way Victoria's written it, to invoke an emotional response. So again, if you're asked about the effect, there's no one right answer as long as you write something logical. Good. Then we've got the rule of three. I'm just going to reveal this because you may or may not know this. But rule of three is presenting words or phrases in groups of three. So let me give you an example. And we've got obviously COP26 happening. Recycling slogan, reduce, reuse, recycle, which I'm sure many of you have seen before. So when you get kind of slogans, especially for political things, or sometimes at the train station, when they say it sorted is another one. These kind of slogans are often given in sets of three, and that's called the rule of three. And why is that useful? Well, it's easy for the reader to remember if it's presented in threes. So we've got rhetorical questions, emotive language, and the rule of three. Then we've got this one here, which is hyperbole. And hyperbole is essentially, it's the same thing as exaggeration. So it's making things sound worse or better than they really are. And my example is this. So you may have said this yourself before, oh, I died of embarrassment, but you didn't literally die. You were embarrassed, but you didn't die from it. So that's obviously a bit of exaggeration, or the technical term, a bit of hyperbole. The mistake people often make with this is that they might read a sentence and it will say the food was terrible, and then they'll highlight terrible and say that's hyperbole. Well, it's not necessarily, because maybe the food was terrible. So you have to try and find real exaggeration, things that really do make things worse or better than they were. And the effect of that is that it kind of brings emphasis to a point. So if you really want to emphasize something, you might exaggerate to make people kind of pay attention to it. And so what about the last one, direct address? This is another really common one in persuasive writing. Anyone got any ideas what that is? If you address someone directly. Not really. This is one that people find really easy to recognize in the text, but they often forget what it's called. So direct address is basically when you're speaking directly to the reader. So you're addressing the reader directly. That's the way to think of it. And the way this is achieved is by using these words like you or your. And there's a really famous poster, says your country needs you, and it's got the hand pointing at you directly. So that's the perfect example of direct address. And the effect of direct address is making the reader feel like the text was written especially for them. So you often see posters, maybe of Nike trainers, saying you will love these trainers or something like that. But the word you makes it sound like the poster is talking directly to you. Okay, great. So there's our first set of language techniques. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. I'm going to cover that up. In the chat box, I want you to write down the names of those 5 language techniques. See how many you can remember. I'll leave the rest of the notes on there as a bit of a clue. And I want everyone to do this if they can. Obviously, Georgie, you can't because you can't use the chat box. I'll let you off this one. But anyone that can use the chat box, see if you can remember those 5 purposes of text. And what you can also do is you can get a post-it note. You can write down these 5 purposes of text. You can stick it on your fridge, stick it on your laptop, somewhere that you're going to see it regularly, and just try and remember the names of these purposes of text if you can for your exam. Oh, okay, Eamon, no problem. Thanks, Victoria. That looks good. John, I can see you got the first one. So that's rhetorical questions. Excellent. Thanks, James. I can see you got those there as well. Again, nice one, Banjo. You got it as well. And Cheryl, good. And Michelle, excellent. All right, good. So that's just a bit of a practice, just trying to kind of remember what those are called, because we'll need those in the next exercise. So we've got rhetorical questions, question you know the answer to, emotive language. So this is the use of emotional language. The rule of 3, it's these kind of slogans presented in 3s. We've got hyperbole, which is basically exaggeration, and then direct address, so addressing the reader directly. Okay, so let's have a practice then and see how you get on. So what we've got here is a text just there, and I've underlined the language techniques that have been used in the text, so making it easier and quicker for you. But what you need to do, where I've got the numbers, you need to write down what the name of that language technique is. So in your chat box, put number 1, tell me what you think it is. Number 2, tell me what language technique you think that is, and so on. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes. Hopefully you should be able to do this quite quick. And let's see how you get on. Obviously, if you can only think of like a couple, just put a couple down. So put the number next to your language technique so that I know which one you think is which. Good. Excellent. So it looks like everyone's got number 1. Yeah, absolutely. So number 1 is definitely a really good example of hyperbole, because you can see, is your work pace a million miles away? So we often say something's a million miles away when we try and kind of emphasize how far away it is, but it's not literally a million miles away. It's maybe, yeah, a few miles away. So good. Number 1 is hyperbole. Let's take that off there then, because you've got it. So number 2, I can see those are coming in. So great. Everyone seems to be in agreement. Number 2 is direct address. So not just me, you as well. So it's talking directly to the reader. We've got the use of the word you. Perfect. All right, so we're all doing this together, so that's good. So what about number 3 then? What do we think that is? So number 3 is just the little kind of blue line under here. Good. Yeah, I think most people are on that one. So number 3 is the word miserable. Miserable is literally an emotion that we feel, isn't it? So that's quite straightforward. That should be emotive language, because that's the use of emotional language, making the reader sort of feel that emotion. And then we've got number 4, which I think maybe some people have merged 3 and 4 together. But yeah, number 4, you can see disastrous, dismal and dreadful. These are kind of emotional words, but actually they're presented in a 3, aren't they? So you could say, for example, that dreadful was emotive language, but also because it's presented in a set of 3, we can also call it the rule of 3. Perfect. And then number 5, I can see we've got a couple of those starting to come in. John's kicked us off. So John's gone for rhetorical. Suman agrees. Gagan, you agree as well. And James is in agreement. Absolutely right. So yeah, so number 5 then is rhetorical questions. Good. So there you go. There's a text. And what you've done is successfully identified those language techniques that have been used in the text. Good. So yes, you were absolutely spot on there, James. Well done. Good. All right, excellent. So that's a bit of practice we do together. Just one quick question then to finish off. We've got a multiple choice question. There's your text. It says, what persuasive writing technique does not feature in this text? So remember, when you're doing your functional skills, read it carefully. So we're looking for the feature that does not feature in the text. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. When you think you know the answer, just put A, B, C or D in the chat box. So remember, we're looking for the feature that does not feature. I can see a couple of B's, so direct address. So remember, direct address means we're using the word you or your or we or something like that. And you can see that we've got a direct address in here, haven't we? So we're looking for a language technique that does not feature. Direct address is in here, so that's not the correct answer. So it's not B. Good. I think we're mostly kind of
A.
Yeah, great. I think everyone is pretty much in agreement. So let's just kind of go through these. So emotive language. Well, we've got this, for the sake of our children. That's pretty emotive. So it's not that one. Is there a rhetorical question? There is. Can you imagine life without it? So it's not this one. So the one that's not in the text is A. Good. Well done. I think everyone got that in the end. Fantastic. So there we go. That's the first part of the session. That is looking at persuasive language techniques. Anyone got any questions before we move on to the last part of the session? Okay, silence. So I'm guessing not. Awesome. So let's jump on to the second half of the session then. So what we're looking at here, I'm just going to break this down a little bit. I'll just cover that up for a second. So what we're going to start off by looking at are some language techniques that are used in descriptive writing. So descriptive writing is all about building a picture in the reader's mind. Descriptive writing might be something like a novel, so a fiction novel, or a review of a restaurant where you the writer's describing the food or the atmosphere in the hotel and things like that. So descriptive writing, you often find these techniques: similes, metaphors, and descriptive language. So this might remind you of the sort of stuff you did at school for English. So a simile is when you compare two things using like or as. And you can see here in the example, George jumped like a cat. So we've got this word like. You can see that means it's a simile because you're comparing something, and we've got the word like in there. The effect of that is that it creates an image in the reader's imagination. All of these really have a similar effect, but what I've put here are kind of 3 different ways that you might sort of express that. So that's a simile, comparing 2 things using like or as. And then we've got a metaphor. So a metaphor is when you describe something by saying it is something else. So metaphors are not literal. And here's the example: her performance stole their hearts. So that means that obviously everyone in the audience loved the performance, but she didn't literally kind of put her hand in their chest and steal their hearts. It's a metaphor. And the effect, again, creates a vivid idea in the reader's mind, helping to engage and absorb them in the writing. Again, when you get asked for the effect, like I say, there isn't one single answer. You can phrase it however you want. And the last one we've got here is descriptive language. And descriptive language is when a text uses lots of adjectives or adverbs or nouns and verbs. So particularly descriptive nouns or particularly descriptive verbs. So a verb is an action word. So walk is a verb. I walked to the shop. If I wanted to make it a bit more descriptive, I might say I rushed to the shop, or I tiptoed to the shop, because they're a lot more descriptive and they give you a bit more idea of the way that that action is carried out. But if you're not familiar with what adjectives, adverbs, nouns and verbs are, do a bit of research and find out, because that's something you'll need to know. So an example might be this. The small round cat trotted excitedly across the room. So we've got an adjective, we've got an adjective, we've got a descriptive verb, and we've got an adverb just there. But like I say, do a bit more research in there if you're not quite sure what these terms mean. And the effect, it forms a clear picture in the reader's mind. So that's our descriptive language techniques. There's only 3 of them: simile, metaphor, and descriptive language. What I'm going to do is just jump forward to here, and we're going to do this similar sort of exercise. So in the chat box, tell me what you think number 1 is, tell me what you think number 2 is, and tell me what you think number 3 is. Let's see how you get on. So I can see lots of people typing. So we've got number 2 as a simile. See if anyone agrees with you, Suman. So Victoria does seem to agree with you, Suman. So that's a good sign. I see some other people are typing, so we'll just give them a couple of seconds. So Louise has been brave enough to go for number 1, and you've gone for a metaphor. Excellent. Tori agrees with number 1. Good. It's nice to see a bit of agreement going on there. Okay, so let's double check then. So the goalkeeper flew across her line. That is a metaphor. Good. Number 2, the Blues big striker flailed like a horse. So you've got like. So remember, simile uses like or as. So absolutely, that is a simile. And then number 3, we've got muddy left boot. So we've got 2 adjectives in there. So number 3 is what we call descriptive language. Good, well done. So there we go. There's 3 examples of language techniques that are used in descriptive texts. And the purpose of those language techniques are to help obviously build an image in the reader's mind. So jumping back again to this slide, let's really quickly look at some language techniques that are used in informative writing, and there's only 2. So a fact, I'm sure everybody knows what a fact is. A fact is something that's true, and it's generally something that's based on evidence. So for example, the sun is hot. I can feel the heat of the sun. It's a fact, it's hot. The effect of a fact in a text is that, number 1, it's clear, and 2, it builds trust in the text as well. So if you're trying to give someone information or teach them something and you're using facts, that's obviously going to build a bit of confidence in the reader. And also it's a nice clear way to relay information as well. So we've got facts and we've also got statistics. Statistics is the use of data. An example might be something like that, where you've got maybe there's a date there, there's a percentage, there's a figure. So statistics, normally quite easy to spot because the numbers stand out on the page. And the effect is the same, basically, just there. So informative language, or I should say informative text, it's quite easy to spot the language techniques, but also with informative text, they're often clear and simple. So a clue that something is informative is often the absence of these sorts of language techniques. If you're trying to give someone information, so for example, if you've got a train timetable and they want to know what time the train goes to Bristol, you're not going to be kind of writing it in metaphors or similes because you're going to confuse people. You want to keep the language clear and simple and just use your facts and statistics. So it's often quite easy to spot informative text because they're quite clear and simple. All right, so let's do a quick one here then. We've only got 2. So what do you think number 1 is? And what do you think number 2 is? So quickly drop that in the chat box. And I was quite confident at the start of the session of finishing before past, but somehow time has got away from me again. Never mind. But yeah, that looks good. So number 1, fruit and vegetables contain a lot of essential nutrients. Of course, that is a fact. We know that's true. And number 2, we've got a quarter of adults, so we've got a statistic. Good. So there we go. That's facts and statistics. So the last question of the session then, just to wrap things up, is this one. Again, we've got multiple choice, A, B, C or D. Have a read of that, and in the chat box, tell me if you think the answer is A, B, C or D. So remember, a simile compares 2 things using like or as. So if you've not got those words like or as, it's not a simile. Good, thank you, the person who just spoke. That's absolutely right. And everyone else has got it right as well. So that is a metaphor. Good. Describing the streets as a jungle. So it's a metaphor. All right, perfect. Well done. So 2 minutes over, but let's quickly wrap things up. So we started off the session by looking at language techniques used in persuasive writing. So you all did that. Then we looked at the language techniques used in informative writing. So really quickly then, in the chat box, give me 1 persuasive language technique. First thing that comes into your head. So persuasive language technique. Yep. So techniques that are used to persuade people. So yeah, Victoria, spot on. So we've got a rhetorical question. Well done, Cheryl. So a motive, hyperbole, James, good. Rule of 3, excellent. Good. So there are persuasive language techniques. And now give me 1 informative language technique. Lovely. Yeah, there's only 2 really to think of. So facts and statistics, excellent. And then give me 1 descriptive writing technique. There are only 3 of these. Well done, Seaman. Simile, yes, good. So remember, description is all about making an image, and similes and metaphors. Really good. Well done. Great. So what I was going to do, but we haven't got much time, is just think about when we see these things in real life. But actually, you see these things in real life all the time. So if you come across an advert in a newspaper, obviously have a look at it, see if you can spot any language techniques that are being used. If you're reading a news article that's describing an event, see if you can spot any descriptive language. If you're looking on Wikipedia, see if you can spot any facts or statistics. So this is really easy to practice. They're everywhere in life and at work. So do kind of your own practice whenever you're reading these things.